In 1521, Ferdinand Magellan sailed halfway around the world and died on a beach in the Philippines, killed by a chief who refused to kneel.
That chief's name was Lapu-Lapu, and his story is just the beginning. This is History Lens.
Most people think Philippine history started when the Spanish arrived. That is wrong by about 60,000 years. The earliest humans reached the Philippine archipelago during the last ice age, when sea levels were low enough to walk between islands. They were not explorers looking for adventure. They were survivors following food. And the 7,000 islands of what we now call the Philippines gave them everything they needed. Around 4,000 years ago, a new group arrived, the Austronesians. Seafarers from Taiwan crossed open ocean in outrigger boats, carrying new languages, new tools, and new ways of living. They settled along coastlines and riverbanks and built a system of governance that Europeans would not encounter for another 3,000 years. It was called the barangay. Each barangay was an independent community led by a datu, a leader chosen not by bloodline alone, but by wisdom, bravery, and the ability to protect his people.
Below the datu were the timawa, free citizens who farmed and fought, and at the base were the alipin, dependents who could earn their way up through loyalty and service. This was not a primitive society.
This was a structured civilization with laws, social contracts, and a justice system enforced by a council of elders. And here is where the story gets strange. In 1987, a construction worker near the Lumpang River in Laguna Province found a copper plate buried in the mud. When scholars finally deciphered it, they discovered it was a legal document dated April 21, 900 AD, written in a mixture of Old Malay, Sanskrit, and Old Javanese. It recorded the forgiveness of a debt measured in gold. This was not scratched graffiti or a simple mark. It was a formal legal contract with names, dates, and specific amounts. The Laguna copperplate inscription is the oldest known written document in the Philippines, and it proves that 600 years before Magellan arrived, Filipinos already had written law, a functioning economy based on gold, and diplomatic connections stretching across Southeast Asia. And the gold was not just metaphorical. In 1917, a woman from the Manobo tribe was walking along the banks of the Wawa River in Mindanao when she spotted something glinting in the mud. She pulled out a solid gold statue, 21 carats, weighing nearly 2 kilograms. It depicted a Hindu-Buddhist goddess, and scholars dated it to the 9th or 10th century. The Golden Tara of Agusan now sits in the Field Museum in Chicago, thousands of miles from where it was made. It is proof that the Philippines was connected to the Hindu and Buddhist worlds long before Christianity arrived. But perhaps the most striking feature of pre-colonial Filipino society was not their gold or their laws, it was their skin. The Spanish called them pintados, meaning the painted ones. When Spanish sailors first encountered the Visayan warriors, they were shocked. These men were covered from neck to ankle in intricate tattoos, patterns so dense and detailed that from a distance they looked like they were wearing dark clothing. But every single line on their skin had been earned. You could not simply choose a tattoo. Each mark represented a kill in battle, an act of bravery, or a rank within the warrior class. A fully tattooed warrior was a walking record of violence and courage, and the process of earning those marks was excruciating. The tattoos were applied by hand, using thorns dipped in soot, hammered into the skin one dot at a time. These were the people Ferdinand Magellan sailed into in 1521. Magellan was not looking for the Philippines. He was trying to sail around the entire world. Backed by the Spanish crown, his fleet of 5 ships had already crossed the Atlantic, navigated the deadly strait at the southern tip of South America, and survived months of starvation crossing the Pacific. By the time he reached the Philippine Islands in March 1521, he had lost 2 ships and dozens of men. When Magellan arrived in Cebu, he found a local ruler named Raja Humabon, who was willing to convert to Christianity and accept Spanish authority. Magellan saw an opportunity. He would use this alliance to bring the surrounding islands under control. But one chief on a nearby island refused. His name was Lapu-Lapu, the Datu of Mactan, and he had no intention of bowing to a foreigner. Magellan decided to make an example of him. On April 27, 1521, Magellan led about 50 armed Spaniards ashore on Mactan. He was confident. His men had muskets, crossbows, and European armor. Lapu-Lapu's warriors had bamboo spears, wooden shields, and stone-tipped arrows. On paper, it should have been a massacre in Spain's favor. It was a massacre, just not the one Magellan expected. The coral-filled shallows prevented Magellan's boats from getting close to shore, forcing his men to wade through waist-deep water in heavy armor. Lapu-Lapu's warriors, who knew every rock and current, attacked from multiple angles. The muskets were powerful but painfully slow to reload in combat. The crossbows were deadly at range but useless in a close fight. The Mactan warriors moved fast, striking with spears and bolos before retreating, then surging forward again. Magellan was hit by a poisoned arrow in the leg. As his men began retreating to the boats, the warriors swarmed him. He was stabbed, slashed, and overwhelmed. Ferdinand Magellan, the man who had sailed farther than any European before him, died face down in the shallow water of a beach on a tiny island in the Pacific. Lapu-Lapu did not chase the fleeing Spaniards. He did not need to. The message was clear. These islands had owners, and they did not kneel. But Spain was not finished. They came back, and they came back with an empire. In 1565, Miguel López de Legazpi arrived with a much larger force and established the first permanent Spanish settlement. Unlike Magellan, Legazpi was not a warrior. He was an administrator who understood that brute force alone would not work. He used alliances, bribes, and the one weapon more powerful than any musket, faith. Catholic missionaries fanned out across the islands, converting barangay by barangay. Baptism was not optional. Those who refused faced punishment, imprisonment, or worse. Indigenous beliefs, the spirits of the forest and sea, the gods of harvest and war, were declared demonic. Sacred objects were burned. Shamans were persecuted. Within a few generations, the spiritual world that had guided Filipino life for thousands of years was pushed underground. But it never disappeared entirely. To this day, Filipino Catholicism carries echoes of the old beliefs. Saints are revered with the same intensity once reserved for ancestral spirits. Festivals blend Christian ritual with pre-colonial tradition. The surface changed, but something deeper survived beneath it. Spain also imposed the encomienda system, granting Spanish officers control over vast territories and the people living on them. Forced labor, called polo y servicio, required Filipino men to work for months building churches, roads, and the massive galleon ships that carried treasure between Manila and Acapulco. The Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, which ran from 1565 to 1815, made Manila one of the most important trading ports in the world, connecting Asian silk and spices with Latin American silver. The wealth was enormous, but almost none of it reached Filipino hands. For 333 years, the Philippines endured Spanish rule. There were revolts, dozens of them. Raja Sulaiman fought back in Manila in 1574. Francisco Dagohoy led an 85-year rebellion in Bohol, one of the longest in history. Diego Silang and his wife Gabriela fought in the north until both were executed. Every generation produced resistance, and every rebellion was crushed. Then, in the late 1800s, a new kind of resistance emerged, not with swords, but with words. José Rizal, a doctor, novelist, and polymath who spoke more than 10 languages, wrote 2 novels that exposed the corruption and cruelty of Spanish colonial rule. His books, Noli Me Tangere and El Filibustismo, were banned, smuggled, and read in secret across the islands. Rizal did not call for revolution. He called for reform, for equality, for recognition that Filipinos were human beings deserving of dignity. Spain's response was to arrest him and execute him by firing squad on December 30, 1896. He was 35 years old. His death did not silence the movement, it ignited it.
By the time Rizal was killed, a man named Andrés Bonifacio had already built something Spain feared more than any army. The Katipunan was a secret revolutionary society, and its membership ritual was unlike anything in European politics.
New members did not simply sign a document. They cut their own arm and signed the oath in their own blood. The society grew in the shadows, communicating through coded messages and meeting in hidden locations, until it had thousands of members across the islands. In August 1896, the Katipunan was discovered by Spanish authorities, but it was too late. Bonifacio gathered his followers at a place called Pugadlawin and tore up their cédulas, the identification papers that marked them as Spanish subjects. The revolution had begun. What followed was brutal and complicated. Filipino forces won early victories in Cavite province under a young general named Emilio Aguinaldo, but internal divisions tore the movement apart. Bonifacio and Aguinaldo clashed over leadership. In a moment that still haunts Filipino history, Bonifacio, the founder of the revolution, was arrested, tried for treason by his own people, and executed in May 1897. Aguinaldo negotiated a truce with Spain and went into exile in Hong Kong, but the truce was temporary, and by 1898, something unexpected happened. The United States went to war with Spain. American warships destroyed the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay, and Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines, believing the Americans had come to help. On June 12, 1898, Emilio Aguinaldo declared Philippine independence on the balcony of his home in Kawit, Cavite. The Philippine flag was raised for the first time. The national anthem was played. After 333 years of Spanish rule, the Philippines was free. Or so they thought. Because across the ocean, in a room in Paris, Spain and the United States were negotiating a treaty, and no one had invited the Filipinos to the table. Under the Treaty of Paris, signed on December 10, 1898, Spain sold the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. The nation that had just declared its independence learned that it had been purchased like property without its consent. What happened next would become one of America's most forgotten wars, but that is a story for the next video.
Thank you for watching. This has been History Lens. If stories like this make you see history differently, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what they left out of the textbooks.